William Thompson's weathered hands froze on the clinic door handle. The howling February wind carried the exact sound of helicopter rotors over Da Nang, 1973. Outside Detroit's blizzard, a German shepherd collapsed against his veterinary clinic, blood darkening fresh snow like it had stained jungle mud 51 years ago. The dog's eyes reflected the emergency exit sign, amber light flickering like muzzle flashes in his nightmares. The chip scanner's beep shattered 5 decades of carefully buried memories. On the screen, Thor, K9 Unit, Detroit Fire Department, status, hero, lives saved, 47. William's coffee mug slipped from trembling fingers, ceramic exploding across linoleum, same pattern as his mess hall cup when the telegram arrived about his brother. 2 wars, 2 notifications, 2 moments when heroes became ghosts. The grandfather clock in his waiting room ticked louder than his racing heart. Outside, the storm raged like the night everything changed. Inside, a dying hero waited for salvation from another forgotten soldier. Some rescues, William realized, you don't know you need until they find you first. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. William Thompson had built his second life on routine and silence. At 68, the former Marine carried his morning coffee with the same precision he'd once carried his rifle through Vietnamese rice paddies. 3 years since Margaret's funeral, he'd learned that grief was easier to manage when wrapped in predictable schedules. Clinic opens at 7, last patient by 10, doors locked by 11. No surprises, no sudden losses, no more empty chairs at the breakfast table. The Detroit neighborhood surrounding his small veterinary practice had seen better decades. Abandoned houses dotted Corktown like missing teeth, their broken windows reflecting the economic decline that had hollowed out the Motor City. But William stayed. Margaret had loved this community, had insisted they could make a difference here. After her cancer took her, continuing her mission felt like the only way to keep her memory breathing. His clinic occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building with his modest apartment above. The hand-painted sign read, "Thompson Veterinary Care" in Margaret's careful script. He'd never had the heart to repaint it. Inside, outdated equipment served a clientele that often paid in gratitude rather than cash. William treated stray cats, patched up dogs from the nearby shelters, and absorbed the stories of pet owners who couldn't afford the fancy clinics downtown. The past month had brought an alarming pattern. 3 fighting dogs, all bearing the signature wounds of organized animal cruelty. Each case had ended the same way: injuries too severe, trauma too deep, peaceful euthanasia the only mercy he could offer. The last one, a pit bull named Rocky, had died looking into William's eyes with such trust that he'd needed 2 glasses of bourbon that night to silence the guilt. Tonight's blizzard had arrived ahead of schedule, dumping 8 inches of snow by 9 o'clock. William should have closed early, should have headed upstairs to his lonely dinner and evening news. But something had kept him puttering around the clinic, organizing supplies that didn't need organizing, checking equipment that worked perfectly fine. Margaret used to tease him about his intuition, claiming he could sense trouble before it arrived. "Your marine radar," she'd called it, usually right before he'd suggest they take a different route home or call to check on a sick neighbor. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm against the February cold. Outside, the streetlights created amber pools in the swirling snow, illuminating a neighborhood settling into winter's grip. William had grown accustomed to the solitude, found comfort in being the last light burning on the block. His neighbors called him Doc Thompson, spoken with the respect reserved for those who'd earned their place through service rather than promotion. As he prepared to lock up, William paused at the clinic's front window. Something moved in the storm, a shadow darker than the night, struggling through the drifts. His hand found the door handle just as the wind's howl triggered memories he'd spent 50 years trying to forget. Some nights the past felt closer than his own reflection. Tonight it was about to walk through his door. The German Shepherd collapsed the moment William opened the door, snow and blood creating a crimson constellation on his clinic floor. The dog's breathing came in shallow gasps, each exhale visible in the frigid air that rushed through the doorway. William's trained eye immediately cataloged the injuries: multiple lacerations across the ribs, infected puncture wounds on the neck, severe malnutrition evident in the prominent hip bones and sunken flanks. "Easy, boy," William murmured, his voice carrying the calm authority that had guided him through battlefield triage and countless emergency surgeries. The dog's eyes, intelligent brown depths clouded with pain, fixed on his face with desperate hope. There was something different about this animal, something that made William's chest tighten with recognition he couldn't yet name. He worked quickly, lifting the 70-pound frame onto the examination table with practiced efficiency. The dog offered no resistance, though William could feel the tremors of pain running through the muscled body. As he began his assessment, his fingers found the source of a persistent metallic clinking, a worn leather collar, its surface scarred but intact. The collar bore engravings, names etched in careful script around the circumference. William squinted in the fluorescent light, making out Sarah Mitchell, age 8, and Robert Chen, age 34, before his vision blurred. His hand shook as he realized what he was seeing. Not decorative engravings, but a memorial. A record of lives that mattered to someone, though he couldn't yet understand why. The microchip scanner beeped insistently as William passed it over the dog's shoulder. The display flickered, then stabilized on information that made him step backward in disbelief. Thor, registration number 4472, Detroit Fire Department K9 Unit. Handler, Captain James Morrison. Status: active service. William's coffee mug slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the linoleum in an explosion of ceramic and lukewarm coffee. The sound echoed like gunfire in the small room, and for a moment he was back in Da Nang, watching his brother's name appear on casualty reports that weren't supposed to exist. "Thor," he whispered, the name carrying weight he was only beginning to understand. His computer hummed to life as trembling fingers navigated to the Detroit Fire Department's database. The search results loaded with agonizing slowness, each pixel revealing a story that defied belief. The first article filled his screen: "Miracle Dog Saves 47 in Apartment Fire." The photograph showed a magnificent German Shepherd standing proud beside a firefighter, both covered in soot but radiating the unmistakable confidence of heroes fresh from battle. The date stamp read October 15, 2018. William scrolled frantically, absorbing details that seemed pulled from legend rather than municipal records. The Riverside Apartments fire had been Detroit's worst residential blaze in decades. 4 stories of low-income housing, home to families who couldn't afford anywhere else. When the electrical fire started in the basement, spreading faster than evacuation protocols could handle, the fire department had faced an impossible choice: retreat and accept massive casualties, or send their best into conditions that violated every safety standard. They'd sent Thor. The dog had made 17 separate trips into the burning building, 17 times through smoke so thick it blinded human rescuers, 17 times past flames hot enough to melt steel. The article listed his saves methodically. Maria Santos, age 73, carried unconscious from her 4th-floor apartment. The Patterson twins, ages 5 and 7, guided through smoke-filled stairwells. Robert Chen, trapped under debris in the lobby, dragged to safety despite Thor's own injuries. Video footage embedded in the article showed Thor in action, his dark form moving through the chaos with purpose that seemed almost supernatural. In one clip, he emerged from the building carrying an unconscious child, the small form gentle in his jaws as he navigated fallen timbers and debris. In another, he stood at attention during the medal ceremony, Mayor Patricia Williams placing the Detroit Medal of Valor around his neck while hundreds applauded. 47 lives. William read the number again, his military mind automatically calculating the mathematics of heroism. In Vietnam, saving a single life had earned men Bronze Stars. Thor had saved 47 people in a single night, and William had never heard his name. The database showed Thor's final entry. Injured in service, October 2020, forced retirement due to permanent leg injury sustained during warehouse rescue. Transferred to private ownership. The sale record was tersely bureaucratic. Sold to Marcus Bradley, $500, November 15, 2020. $500. William stared at the figure until it burned into his retinas. The city had sold their greatest hero for the price of a decent television. Thor lifted his head weakly, those intelligent eyes meeting William's gaze. In their depths, William saw something he recognized from his own mirror, the look of a warrior who had given everything and been forgotten, the look of someone who had saved others but couldn't save himself. 47 people, William said aloud, his voice breaking on the words. 47 families owe their lives to you. Outside, the storm continued its assault on Detroit. But inside the clinic, two veterans had found each other in the darkness. Dawn arrived gray and bitter, finding William hunched over his computer with bloodshot eyes and a third cup of coffee growing cold at his elbow. Thor lay on the heated examination table, breathing steadier now after 6 hours of William's careful ministrations. The infected wounds had been cleaned and dressed. IV fluids were restoring some strength to the emaciated frame, but the emotional wounds ran deeper than medicine could reach. William had spent the sleepless hours diving into Thor's story, each discovery adding weight to the fury building in his chest. The hero's fall from grace read like a betrayal scripted by bureaucrats who had never faced fire or enemy bullets. Captain James Morrison, Thor's handler and partner, had died in a car accident 18 months after Thor's forced retirement. The insurance settlement had gone to Morrison's widow, Linda, who found herself unable to afford the specialized veterinary care Thor's service injuries required. The sale documents painted a picture of desperation masked as pragmatism. Linda Morrison had tried for months to find Thor a home with another fire department, but budget cuts had eliminated K-9 programs across the state. The private rescue organizations were overwhelmed, and Thor's medical needs made him an expensive charity case. When Marcus Bradley offered $500 and promised good care for a working dog, Linda had convinced herself she was doing right by her husband's partner. William traced the address on Bradley's registration, 1247 Industrial Boulevard, a warehouse district where legitimate businesses had fled years ago. His phone calls to the Detroit Fire Department yielded nothing but transferred calls and bureaucratic dead ends. Chief Robert Hayes, when William finally reached him, spoke with the weary tone of a man drowning in budget cuts and political pressure. "Thor, that was 4 years ago, Doc. We don't maintain records on retired animals. Once they're sold, they're civilian property." The chief's voice carried no malice, only the exhausted acceptance of a system that had run out of resources for sentiment. "Look, I remember that dog. Hell of an animal. But we've got 12 stations operating with skeleton crews and equipment from the Clinton administration. I can't spare officers to chase down every sob story." The conversation ended with Hayes hanging up, but not before mentioning that Marcus Bradley had been a Detroit firefighter once. "Good man, as I recall. Left the service around 2019. Personal reasons." William's research into Bradley's background revealed a different kind of casualty. Marcus Bradley had served 8 years with Station 19, earning commendations for bravery and dedication. His personnel file, accessible through Williams' veteran network connections, showed exemplary service until May 2019. The incident report was clinical in its language but devastating in its implications. Structural collapse during a warehouse fire, one fatality, one survivor suffering severe psychological trauma. The dead firefighter was David Chen, Bradley's partner and best friend. The survivor was Bradley himself, pulled unconscious from the debris while Chen's body remained trapped beneath burning timbers. The psychological evaluation following the incident noted severe PTSD, survivor's guilt, and alcohol abuse. Bradley had been medically discharged 6 months later, his pension reduced due to the circumstances of his departure. The final piece of the puzzle came through Williams' contact at the VA hospital. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a psychiatrist who specialized in first responder trauma, knew Bradley's case. "He's been in and out of treatment for 4 years, she explained during their phone conversation. Classic survivor's guilt complicated by alcohol dependence. He blames himself for David's death. Can't understand why he lived when his partner didn't. Last I heard, he was living in that warehouse district, avoiding contact with anyone from his old life." "Would he hurt an animal?" William asked, though he already knew the answer from Thor's condition. Dr. Martinez's silence stretched long enough to confirm his fears. "Marcus isn't evil, Dr. Thompson. He's broken. Sometimes broken people break other things, especially things that remind them of what they've lost. If this dog was connected to his firefighting days," the implication hung heavy between them. Thor wasn't just an animal to Bradley. He was a living reminder of the brotherhood Bradley had lost, the hero Bradley felt he'd failed to be. Every day Thor suffered became a twisted form of penance, as if punishing the dog could somehow balance the cosmic scales that had taken David Chen instead of Marcus Bradley. William ended the call and looked at Thor, who had managed to lift his head and was watching him with those intelligent, pain-filled eyes. The dog's tail made a weak attempt to wag when their gazes met, and William felt something break open in his chest. This animal had saved 47 lives and been rewarded with 4 years of torture at the hands of a man who should have understood what service meant. The Facebook post went live at 9:17 a.m. William had agonized over the wording, knowing that once he hit share, there would be no turning back. The Detroit community groups had been his lifeline since Margaret's death, a digital neighborhood where people still cared about justice and helping their own. "Urgent. Need your help for a Detroit hero," the post began, accompanied by Thor's medal ceremony photo alongside a current picture that showed his wounded condition. William laid out the facts without embellishment. 47 lives saved, sold for $500, 4 years of abuse, and a city that had forgotten its greatest K9 hero. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the post had been shared 300 times. Comments poured in from firefighters, veterans, and citizens who remembered Thor's heroic night. Someone started a GoFundMe page that reached $5,000 in its first hour. Local news stations began calling, their reporters smelling a story that combined heroism, betrayal, and redemption in perfect proportions for the evening broadcast. But along with the support came a complication William hadn't anticipated. At 11:30 a.m., his clinic door chimed and Marcus Bradley walked in. The man was smaller than William had expected, probably 45, but looking older, with the hollowed cheeks and bloodshot eyes of someone who had been running from himself for too long. He moved with the careful precision of a functional alcoholic, and when he spoke, his voice carried the barely controlled rage of a man who had nothing left to lose. "That's my dog," Bradley said, pointing at Thor. "And I want him back." The confrontation in William's clinic crackled with the tension of two men who had seen too much and lost even more. Marcus Bradley stood in the doorway like a specter from Thor's nightmares, his presence causing the dog to whimper and try to burrow deeper into the blanket William had provided. The sound, pure terror from an animal that had once charged into burning buildings sent a spike of protective rage through William's chest. "You need to leave," William said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had faced down enemy soldiers and grieving pet owners with equal composure. "That animal is under medical care, and you're clearly distressing him." Bradley's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. "Medical care I'm paying for, old man. Thor belongs to me. I've got the papers to prove it." He pulled a crumpled document from his jacket pocket, waving it like a weapon. "Detroit Fire Department. Transfer of ownership. All legal and proper. $500, paid in full." "Legal doesn't make it right," William replied, positioning himself between Bradley and Thor. "That dog saved 47 lives. He deserves better than what you've given him." "Deserves?" Bradley's voice rose and William caught the smell of alcohol despite the early hour. "You want to talk about what people deserve? My partner David deserved to come home to his wife and kids. I deserved not to watch my best friend die because I was too much of a coward to reach him in time. But we don't always get what we deserve, do we, Doc?" The revelation hit William like a physical blow. This wasn't simple cruelty. This was a man drowning in survivor's guilt, using Thor as both reminder and scapegoat for his own failures. William recognized the symptoms because he'd carried them himself for 50 years, the weight of coming home when others didn't. "What happened to your partner wasn't Thor's fault," William said quietly. "Punishing him won't bring David back." Bradley's face contorted with rage and pain. "Don't you dare say his name. You don't know anything about what happened that night." "Thor here. He was supposed to be at that warehouse fire. Protocol said K9 units for search and rescue in structural collapses, but his leg was acting up, so they left him behind." His voice broke on the words. "If Thor had been there, he might have found David in time. Instead, my partner died alone in the dark while your precious hero was warm and safe at the station." The twisted logic was heartbreaking in its desperate need for someone to blame. William had seen it before, in fellow veterans who couldn't accept that sometimes good people died for no reason other than bad luck and worse timing. Bradley had constructed an elaborate mythology where Thor's absence had somehow caused David's death, and punishing the dog became a form of justice in his fractured worldview. "So you bought him?" William said, understanding flooding through him. "You bought him to make him suffer. I bought him to teach him what David learned, that being a hero doesn't protect you from the world's cruelty." Bradley's eyes were wild now, the carefully maintained facade cracking. "Every day for 4 years, I've made sure he understands that. The fighting ring, the beatings, the hunger, it's all education. Thor needed to learn that heroes die just like everyone else." The casual mention of a fighting ring sent ice through William's veins. The other injured dogs he'd treated, the systematic torture, the organized cruelty. Bradley wasn't just abusing Thor. He was running an entire operation designed to break spirits and destroy hope. "How many others?" William asked. "What? How many other dogs have you put through your education? How many have you tortured in the name of your dead partner?" Bradley's silence was answer enough. William thought of Rocky, the pit bull who had died in his arms just last week, and felt bile rise in his throat. How many animals had suffered because one man couldn't process his grief in a healthy way? Outside, the first news van pulled up to the clinic, its satellite dish extending like a mechanical flower seeking signal. William's Facebook post had gone viral faster than he'd anticipated, and the media was descending with the hungry efficiency of predators scenting blood. Through the window, he could see reporter Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 setting up her camera, her producer already scanning the building for the best angles. "Looks like you've called in the cavalry," Bradley observed, his voice regaining some composure as he spotted the news crew. "Think they'll care about property rights when they're chasing their feel-good story?" "I think they'll care about justice," William replied, but doubt crept into his voice. The law was clear. Bradley owned Thor legally, regardless of the moral implications. Unless William could prove active abuse, and unless the authorities cared enough to prosecute, Thor would be returned to his tormentor. The clinic's phone began ringing incessantly, each call bringing more attention to their standoff. William let it go to voicemail, knowing that engaging with media right now would only complicate an already volatile situation. Through the window, he watched as more vehicles arrived, protesters carrying hastily made signs reading, "Save Thor" and "Heroes Protect Heroes," counter-protesters arguing about property rights and government overreach, and police officers trying to maintain order in the growing chaos. Bradley watched the circus outside with something approaching satisfaction. "You've made this into quite the spectacle. But spectacles don't change the law. Thor comes with me, or I call my lawyer and have you arrested for theft." "Your lawyer?" William couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "The man living in an abandoned warehouse has a lawyer? The man who understands property law has contacts." Bradley's smile was sharp. "Amazing what 4 years of dealing with animal control and nosy neighbors teaches you about legal loopholes. I know exactly how far I can push before it becomes actionable abuse. Thor's injuries, all documented as training accidents, the weight loss, prescribed diet for optimal fighting condition. Every mark on his body has a legal explanation." The sophisticated nature of Bradley's cruelty was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire situation. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated torture designed to stay just within legal bounds while maximizing psychological damage. William realized he was dealing with a man who had spent years perfecting the art of inflicting pain while maintaining plausible deniability. Thor whimpered again, and both men turned toward the examination table. The dog was attempting to stand, his legs shaking with the effort, driven by an instinct to protect William from the source of his trauma. The gesture was heartbreaking in its futile courage. Even broken and afraid, Thor's first impulse was to shield others from harm. "Look at him," William said softly. "After everything you've done, he's still trying to be a hero. Still trying to protect someone else." Bradley's face flickered with something that might have been regret before hardening again. "Heroes are fools. David was a hero, and it got him killed. Thor was a hero, and look where it got him. Sometimes the world needs to break heroes to teach them the truth. And what truth is that? That courage is just stupidity with good press. That sacrifice is just a pretty word for waste, that the people you save will forget your name before your body's cold." Bradley's voice carried the weight of 4 years' worth of accumulated bitterness. "I'm doing Thor a favor, teaching him to be realistic about human nature." The crowd outside had grown to nearly 50 people, their chants of "Free Thor" audible through the clinic's windows. William watched as uniformed firefighters began arriving, their faces grim with recognition of the betrayal being discussed on every news channel. Captain Sarah Martinez from Station 12 stood at the front of the group, her jaw set with the determination of someone who had heard enough about heroes being abandoned. "They remember," William said, gesturing toward the window. "David's sacrifice, Thor's heroism. People remember. You're the only one who's forgotten what service means." Bradley followed his gaze to the crowd, and for a moment his composure wavered. Among the protesters were faces he recognized, fellow firefighters who had served with honor, families who had been touched by tragedy and responded with compassion rather than cruelty. The isolation he had chosen was being reflected back at him, showing him exactly how alone he had become in his quest for vengeance against an innocent animal. 5 minutes, Bradley said finally. "I'll give you 5 minutes to say goodbye, then Thor comes with me. This circus ends today." William felt time compressing around him, 47 lives balanced against 5 minutes of borrowed time. Outside, the crowd's chanting grew louder, their voices demanding justice for a hero who had never asked for anything but the chance to serve. Thor struggled to his feet, those intelligent eyes fixed on William's face with complete trust, waiting for the man who had shown him kindness to find a way to make the nightmare end. The phone rang again, and this time William answered it. "Dr. Thompson?" "This is Judge Patricia Morrison, Wayne County Family Court. I understand you have a situation that needs immediate legal intervention." Hope flickered in William's chest like a candle flame in winter wind, fragile but real. Judge Patricia Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed lives. "Dr. Thompson, I've been following this situation through the news coverage and social media. My late husband was Captain James Morrison, Thor's original handler." The revelation hit William like lightning. James Morrison, the man whose death had led to Thor's sale, had been married to a sitting judge. The cosmic irony was almost too perfect. The legal system that had failed Thor might now be his salvation, guided by the widow of his fallen partner. "Your Honor," William began, but Judge Morrison cut him off. "I'm calling in my official capacity, but I want you to know this is deeply personal. James loved that dog-like family. When he died, I was drowning in grief and medical bills. I didn't know what Marcus Bradley really intended when he offered to take Thor. If I had—" Her voice broke slightly before regaining its professional composure. "I'm issuing an emergency restraining order preventing the removal of Thor from your clinic pending a full hearing. You should receive the paperwork within the hour." Bradley, who had been listening to William's side of the conversation with growing alarm, grabbed for the phone. "Let me talk to whoever that is. This is kidnapping." William held the phone away from Bradley's reach. "Judge Morrison, the current owner is here and becoming agitated. The situation could escalate quickly." "Put him on speaker," the judge commanded. When Bradley's voice filled the clinic, Judge Morrison's tone became arctic. "Mr. Bradley, this is Judge Patricia Morrison, Wayne County Family Court. You are hereby ordered to cease any attempts to remove the animal in question from Dr. Thompson's care. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest for contempt of court." Bradley's face went white. "You can't do this. I own that dog legally. You can't just ignore property rights because of some sob story." "Mr. Bradley, I can and I am." "Dr. Thompson, I'm also authorizing emergency veterinary care at county expense pending resolution. A formal hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Both parties are required to appear." The line went dead, leaving Bradley staring at the phone with the expression of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Outside, the crowd had grown to over 100 people, their chants now audible through the clinic's walls. News vans from 3 different stations created a media circus on the normally quiet street, their reporters doing live broadcasts about the legal drama unfolding inside. "This isn't over," Bradley said, his voice hollow with defeat. "You think one judge can change 4 years of legal ownership? I know the system, old man. There are appeals, higher courts, lawyers who understand property law better than some bleeding heart family court judge." "You're right," William said quietly. "This isn't over. But for today, Thor stays safe." "That's enough for now." Bradley moved toward the door, then stopped. "You want to know something funny? I didn't start out wanting to hurt him. When I first brought Thor home, I thought maybe having James's dog would help me feel connected to something good again. But every time I looked at him, all I could see was David dying alone while heroes got medals and parades." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. William could see the man Bradley had been before trauma and alcohol had twisted his perspective, a firefighter who had once run toward danger, who had understood what service meant before survivor's guilt had poisoned everything he touched. "It's not too late to change," William offered. David wouldn't have wanted this. Bradley's laugh was bitter. You didn't know David. He believed in justice, in right and wrong, in heroes and villains. What would he think of me now? What would he think of what I've become? He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Maybe that's why I kept Thor around. So someone would witness what I'd turned into. So there'd be evidence of how far a good man can fall. With that, Bradley walked out into the chaos of protesters and reporters, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost returning to haunt familiar streets. William watched him go, feeling a complex mixture of relief and pity. The immediate threat to Thor was over, but the larger questions about justice, redemption, and the price of trauma remained unresolved. The clinic's waiting room filled rapidly with visitors drawn by the viral story. Captain Sarah Martinez from Station 12 arrived with a delegation of active and retired firefighters, their faces grim with the solemnity of men and women who understood what betrayal looked like. Behind them came families, some carrying flowers, others bringing donations, all wanting to pay respects to a hero they had only recently learned about. 8-year-old Emma Chen stood at the front of the group, clutching a hand-drawn card that read, "Thank you, Thor," in careful crayon letters. Her father, Robert Chen, was one of the 47 people Thor had saved during the apartment fire. They had driven 3 hours from Grand Rapids after seeing the news coverage, determined to show their gratitude to the dog who had given them 6 more years together. "Dr. Thompson," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, "we named our daughter Emma because it means whole or complete. Without Thor, our family would never have been complete. We've been sending donations to animal charities for years in his honor, never knowing what had happened to him." The stories came one after another, a testament to the ripple effects of heroism. Maria Santos, now 77, had used the second chance Thor gave her to watch 3 grandchildren grow up. The Patterson twins, saved as 5- and 7-year-olds, were now teenagers who volunteered at local animal shelters. Each rescue had created circles of gratitude that expanded through families and communities, touching hundreds of lives in ways Thor would never know. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the psychiatrist who specialized in first responder trauma, arrived as the evening shadows grew long. She found William in the recovery room sitting beside Thor's bed while the dog slept peacefully for the first time in years. "How is he?" she asked, pulling up a chair. "Physically, he'll recover. The infections are responding to antibiotics, and he's already putting on weight." Emotionally, William shrugged. How do you heal 4 years of systematic abuse? How do you teach an animal to trust again when the person who hurt him was someone who should have understood what service means? Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "I've been treating Marcus Bradley on and off for 4 years. He's not evil, Dr. Thompson. He's broken in ways that made him break other things. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it might help you understand why. Judge Morrison mentioned you might testify tomorrow about Bradley's mental state. I will. The court needs to understand that this case is about more than animal cruelty. It's about how trauma can turn victims into perpetrators if we don't intervene. Marcus bought Thor as a way to externalize his self-hatred. Every injury he inflicted on that dog was really an injury he wanted to inflict on himself." William looked down at Thor, who had shifted in his sleep to rest his head closer to William's chair. "What happens to Bradley now? That depends on him. The criminal charges for animal cruelty are almost certain. The evidence is overwhelming. But he could choose treatment over jail time if he's willing to admit he needs help. The question is whether he's ready to face his demons or if he'll keep running from them." As night fell over Detroit, the crowd outside began to disperse, but not before organizing a 24-hour vigil to ensure Thor's safety. Volunteers from the local ASPCA set up a donation table, while retired firefighters took shifts guarding the clinic entrance. The viral story had tapped into something deeper than sympathy for an abused animal. It had awakened a community's conscience about how society treats its heroes when their useful years are over. William settled into a reclining chair beside Thor's bed, unwilling to leave the dog alone on his first night of safety in 4 years. As he drifted toward sleep, he thought about the strange mathematics of heroism, how one animal's courage had saved 47 lives, which had touched hundreds more, which had now mobilized thousands in his defense. Outside, snow continued to fall on Detroit, covering the scars of urban decay with pristine white. Inside the clinic, 2 veterans rested together, their dreams haunted by different wars but united in their understanding of what it meant to serve others, even when those others had forgotten to serve them in return. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and judges, testimony and verdicts, decisions that would determine whether justice was still possible in a world that too often forgot its debts to those who sacrificed for others. But tonight, Thor slept without fear for the first time in 4 years, and that small miracle felt like victory enough. The Wayne County Courthouse buzzed with an energy typically reserved for high-profile criminal trials, not civil disputes over animal ownership. By 8 a.m., every seat in Judge Morrison's courtroom was filled with overflow crowds gathering in the hallways and on the courthouse steps. Local news stations broadcast live coverage, while national outlets picked up the story of the hero dog whose fate hung in the balance of legal technicalities and moral imperatives. William arrived with Thor at his side, the German shepherd moving slowly but with dignity restored. 3 weeks of medical care had worked wonders on the physical damage. Wounds healed, weight returning, coat regaining its lustrous black and tan coloring. But the psychological scars remained visible in Thor's cautious movements and the way he stayed close to William's legs, seeking protection from a world that had taught him that humans could not be trusted. Marcus Bradley sat alone at the defendant's table, his court-appointed attorney whispering urgent strategies that Bradley seemed unable to process. The past 3 weeks had been devastating for the former firefighter. His illegal dog-fighting operation had been raided by police, resulting in the rescue of 17 animals and criminal charges that could send him to prison for decades. Media coverage had been uniformly hostile, painting him as a monster who had betrayed everything his former profession represented. But it was the testimony from his former colleagues that had broken him completely. Captain Sarah Martinez had given a press conference detailing Bradley's exemplary service record before the warehouse fire that killed David Chen. She spoke of a man who had once risked his life to save others, who had been destroyed by trauma and survivor's guilt rather than supported by the system he had served. The revelation that heroes could fall so far had shaken the firefighting community to its core. Judge Morrison called the court to order, her face a mask of professional neutrality that couldn't quite hide the personal investment she had in the case. This hearing will determine the custody of Thor, registration number 4472, currently in the care of Dr. William Thompson. Mr. Bradley, you are appearing pro se? Bradley's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to make a statement before we proceed with testimony. Very well, Mr. Bradley. You may address the court. Bradley rose unsteadily, his hands shaking as he gripped the table for support. When he spoke, his voice carried the hollow tone of a man who had lost everything and was only now beginning to understand why. Your Honor, I need to tell the truth about what I did and why I did it. He paused, struggling with words that felt foreign in his mouth. 4 years ago, I bought Thor from the fire department because I was angry. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at myself for surviving when my partner David didn't. I thought if I could make Thor suffer like I was suffering, It would somehow balance the scales. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the quiet whir of television cameras. Bradley's confession was being broadcast live across the nation, his personal breakdown becoming public spectacle. I told myself I was teaching him about the real world, about how cruel life could be. But the truth is, I was trying to destroy him because he represented everything I used to believe in: courage, service, heroism. I couldn't destroy those beliefs in myself, so I tried to destroy them in him. Tears began flowing down Bradley's cheeks, 4 years of suppressed grief finally finding release. David Chen was my best friend, my partner, my brother. When he died in that warehouse fire, something in me died too. But that wasn't Thor's fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except mine for not being able to save him. William watched Bradley's breakdown with complex emotions. This was the man who had tortured Thor for 4 years, who had built a criminal empire based on animal cruelty. But it was also a fellow veteran destroyed by trauma, a former hero who had lost his way in the darkness of survivor's guilt. "I've done terrible things," Bradley continued. "To Thor, to other animals, to the memory of my partner who died believing in the nobility of our profession. I can't undo any of it, but I can stop making it worse." He turned toward William and Thor, his face crumpling with the weight of accumulated shame. "Dr. Thompson, I don't deserve your forgiveness. Thor doesn't deserve what I put him through. If there's any justice in this world, he'll never have to see me again." The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Bradley sat down heavily, his confession hanging in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Judge Morrison rapped her gavel for order, but William could see tears in her eyes as she struggled to maintain judicial composure. "Mr. Bradley," the judge said carefully, "are you voluntarily relinquishing your legal claim to Thor?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm signing over full ownership to Dr. Thompson, with no conditions and no expectation of visitation rights. Thor deserves a chance at happiness, and I'm the last person who should be part of that." William felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness as Bradley's attorney produced the transfer documents. The legal battle was over, but the moral complexities remained. How do you process forgiveness for someone who has confessed to systematic cruelty? How do you balance justice with compassion when the perpetrator is clearly as damaged as his victim? Dr. Sarah Martinez took the witness stand to provide context for Bradley's confession. Her testimony painted a picture of a man destroyed by untreated PTSD, someone who had received minimal support from the department after losing his partner. She spoke of the epidemic of suicide and substance abuse among first responders, of heroes who returned from the battles with their demons, only to find society had moved on without providing the resources they needed to heal. "Marcus Bradley committed terrible crimes," she testified, "but he's also a casualty of our failure to support those who serve. If we want to prevent future cases like this, we need to address the root causes of trauma rather than simply punishing the symptoms." The final witness was Emma Chen, now 8 years old, who had insisted on testifying despite her parents' reluctance to put her through the media circus. She approached Thor with the fearlessness of childhood, kneeling beside him as he lay next to William's chair. "Thor," she said softly, stroking his head with gentle fingers, "thank you for saving my daddy. I'm sorry someone hurt you, but you're safe now." Thor's tail wagged weakly, the first sign of joy he had shown since arriving at William's clinic. The simple interaction between child and dog captured something that legal arguments and expert testimony could not: the pure connection between innocence and heroism, unmarked by the complications of adult trauma and guilt. Judge Morrison's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Thor would remain with William permanently, with the court establishing a trust fund from the donations to ensure his lifelong care. Bradley would serve 2 years in minimum security prison, followed by mandatory psychological treatment and community service at animal rescue organizations. But as the gavel fell and reporters rushed to file their stories, William found himself thinking about the larger questions the case had raised. How many other heroes, human and animal, were suffering in silence because society had forgotten its debts to those who served? How many Marcus Bradleys were walking around with untreated trauma, their pain metastasizing into cruelty toward the innocent? Thor's story had ended happily, but William knew it was just one chapter in a much larger book about how America treated its veterans when the parades were over and the cameras had moved on to newer heroes. The truth about Thor's rescue had become a national phenomenon, but 6 months later, the harsh reality of sustaining public attention began to set in. The crowdfunding had provided enough money for Thor's immediate medical needs, but the long-term costs of caring for a traumatized service animal were mounting. William's veterinary practice, already operating on thin margins, was struggling under the weight of Thor's specialized care requirements and the constant stream of visitors who wanted to meet the famous hero dog. More troubling were the revelations that continued to emerge from the investigation into Marcus Bradley's dogfighting operation. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had led the raid on Bradley's warehouse, discovered evidence of a network that stretched across 3 states. Bradley hadn't been operating alone. He was part of a larger criminal organization that specifically targeted retired service animals, exploiting the legal gray area that left these heroes without protection once their working years ended. "We've identified at least 37 other cases," Rodriguez told William during one of her regular updates. "Military working dogs, police canines, search and rescue animals, all sold to private owners who turned them into fighting dogs or bait animals. The criminals know these animals are well-trained and valuable, but they also know nobody's keeping track of them once they're retired." The scope of the abuse was staggering. Thor's case had pulled back the curtain on a systematic exploitation of America's four-legged veterans, revealing a problem that went far beyond one traumatized firefighter's personal vendetta. Each rescued animal brought its own story of heroism betrayed, of service repaid with suffering. William found himself at the center of a movement he had never intended to start. Families of service members killed in action reached out, sharing stories of beloved military working dogs that had disappeared into private hands after their handlers' deaths. Retired police officers spoke of canine partners sold at auction when departments faced budget cuts. The pattern was consistent and heartbreaking. Heroes discarded when they were no longer useful, forgotten by the institutions they had served. The worst revelation came through an anonymous tip that led investigators to a fighting ring in rural Michigan. Among the animals rescued was Rex, a former bomb detection dog who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before being sold to a private collector who had promised to provide a retirement home for the veteran. Instead, Rex had been starved and abused to make him aggressive, then forced to fight for the entertainment of spectators who bet on which broken hero would survive. Rex arrived at Williams' clinic on a rainy Thursday evening, carried by 2 Detroit police officers who had volunteered to transport rescued animals. The German Shepherd was in even worse condition than Thor had been, missing an eye, bearing scars from countless fights, so traumatized that he couldn't tolerate human touch without violent panic attacks. "This one's bad, Doc," Officer James Sullivan said as they carefully placed Rex in the isolation kennel William had prepared. The vet at the rescue facility said he might never recover. Been fighting for 2 years, maybe longer. They used him as a training dummy for younger dogs, let them practice their killing techniques on a hero who couldn't fight back. William knelt beside the kennel, studying Rex's remaining eye. Like Thor, the dog bore the unmistakable intelligence of a working animal, but the spark of trust had been extinguished completely. Rex had retreated so far into himself that he seemed more like a shell than a living creature. Thor's reaction to Rex was immediate and heartbreaking. The moment he saw the new arrival, Thor positioned himself between Rex's kennel and the clinic entrance, as if protecting his fellow veteran from further harm. Despite his own trauma, Thor's protective instincts had returned as his physical health improved. William watched the interaction with a mixture of hope and despair. If Thor could rediscover his purpose in protecting other damaged animals, perhaps there was a path forward for all of them. The media attention around Rex's case brought Senator Patricia Williams to Williams' clinic. The former Detroit mayor who had awarded Thor his Medal of Valor was now serving her first term in the U.S. Senate, and she arrived with a proposal that could change everything. "Dr. Thompson," she said as they sat in his small office while Thor lay protectively near Rex's kennel, "what you've uncovered here is a national disgrace. These animals served our country with the same courage as human veterans, and we're allowing them to be tortured and killed for entertainment. I'm introducing legislation that would create a national registry for retired service animals and provide federal funding for their lifelong care." The Hero Animal Protection Act was ambitious in scope. It would require all military, police, and fire departments to maintain records of their working animals throughout their lives. Retired service animals would receive identification tags that made harming them a federal crime, with penalties comparable to assaulting a police officer. Most importantly, the bill would establish rehabilitation centers across the country specifically designed to care for traumatized service animals. "We need a flagship facility," Senator Williams explained. "Somewhere to demonstrate that this kind of care is possible, that these animals can recover and find purpose again. I'd like that facility to be here, with you as the director." The offer was overwhelming. William was 69 years old, supposedly retired from the grand gestures and ambitious projects of his younger years. But looking at Thor and Rex, at the growing number of damaged heroes finding their way to his clinic, he realized that retirement was a luxury he couldn't afford. These animals needed an advocate, and somehow he had become their voice. The decision became easier when Dr. Sarah Martinez approached him with her own proposal. The psychiatrist who had been treating Marcus Bradley suggested expanding the program to include human veterans alongside the animals. "There's growing evidence that caring for damaged animals can be therapeutic for people with PTSD," she explained. "If we could create a program where human veterans help rehabilitate animal veterans, both groups might heal together." The concept was revolutionary. A facility where broken heroes could find purpose in caring for other broken heroes, where the bonds forged through shared service could become the foundation for mutual healing. William imagined Marcus Bradley, once he completed his prison sentence, working alongside other veterans to undo the damage he had helped create. But the most compelling argument came from an unexpected source. Robert Chen, whose daughter Emma had testified at Thor's custody hearing, visited the clinic with a proposal from the families of Thor's 47 rescued victims. They wanted to establish an endowment that would ensure the new facility's long-term funding. "Dr. Thompson," Chen said, his 8-year-old daughter Emma playing gently with Thor in the background, "you've given us the chance to pay back a debt we never knew we owed." Thor saved 47 lives that night, and those lives have created families, touched communities, inspired others to serve. The ripple effects of his heroism are immeasurable. Emma looked up from where she was teaching Thor to shake hands, her young face serious with the wisdom that sometimes emerges from innocence. "Mr. William, Thor was sad because nobody remembered he was a hero. But now, everybody remembers. Can you help the other sad heroes remember too?" The child's question crystallized everything William had been feeling but couldn't articulate. This wasn't just about animal welfare or veteran services. It was about memory. about ensuring that a society's heroes didn't disappear into the shadows when their usefulness ended. It was about creating systems that honored service rather than exploiting it. That evening, as William sat in his clinic surrounded by damaged animals slowly learning to trust again, he called Senator Williams to accept her offer. The Thompson Center for Hero Animal Rehabilitation would become reality, a place where Thor's story of redemption could be repeated for countless others. Outside, Detroit's winter was giving way to spring, the first green shoots pushing through snow-covered ground. Inside the clinic, Thor had managed to coax Rex into eating from his hand, a small miracle of trust between veterans who understood each other's pain. The work ahead would be monumental, building facilities, training staff, creating protocols for animals so damaged they seemed beyond help. But William had learned something important from Thor's recovery. Heroes weren't defined by their wounds, but by their willingness to keep serving despite them. As he locked up the clinic that night, William realized he was no longer just treating individual animals. He was part of a movement to redefine how America honored its veterans, both human and animal. Thor's suffering had revealed a national failing, but his recovery pointed toward redemption that was still possible. The real work was just beginning. 5 years after that snowy February night when Thor collapsed at William's clinic door, the Thompson Center for Hero Animal Rehabilitation sprawled across 40 acres of reclaimed farmland outside Detroit. What had begun as one man's desperate attempt to save a single dog had evolved into a national model for veteran animal care, with waiting lists that stretched months and success stories that made headlines across the country. William, now 74, but moving with the purposeful energy of someone who had found his true calling, walked the morning rounds with Thor at his side. The German Shepherd, approaching his 12th birthday, bore the dignified bearing of an elder statesman. His muzzle had gone silver, and he moved more carefully than in his prime fighting years, but his eyes remained bright with intelligence and the quiet confidence of an animal who had rediscovered his worth. The transformation in both dog and man was remarkable. Thor had evolved from broken victim to therapeutic partner, working alongside human veterans to rehabilitate other damaged animals. His intuitive understanding of trauma, how to approach without threatening, how to offer comfort without overwhelming, how to demonstrate that trust was possible again, had made him invaluable to the center's mission. This morning brought a special arrival. Marcus Bradley stepped off the transport van, his prison sentence completed, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing the tentative expression of a man returning to a world he wasn't sure would accept him. At 49, he looked older than his years, gray threading through his hair and lines mapping the geography of remorse across his face. But his eyes held something they hadn't possessed in years, a fragile hope that redemption might still be possible. Thor's reaction to seeing his former tormentor was the most closely watched moment of the morning. Staff members held their breath as the two veterans, one human, one canine, faced each other across the gravel path. For a long moment they simply stood there, predator and prey, in a dynamic that had defined 4 years of horror. Then Thor took a single step forward, his tail making the smallest of movements. Not the enthusiastic wag of greeting, but the cautious acknowledgement of someone who remembered pain but was willing to consider the possibility of something different. Bradley dropped to one knee, tears streaming down his weathered face, extending his hand with the careful reverence of someone approaching a sacred relic. "I'm sorry," Bradley whispered, his voice breaking on the words he had practiced in his cell for 2 years. "I'm so damn sorry, Thor. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to make up for what I did." Thor approached slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. When he reached Bradley, he didn't jump or show excitement. Instead, He simply sat down and leaned against the man's leg, offering the weight of his body as both forgiveness and trust. The gesture was profound in its simplicity, a lesson in grace that left witnesses struggling to contain their emotions. Dr. Sarah Martinez, now serving as the center's chief psychiatric consultant, documented the interaction for her research on trauma recovery and reconciliation. What we're seeing here challenges everything we thought we knew about forgiveness and healing, she explained to the gathered staff. Thor has every reason to fear or hate Marcus, but instead, he's choosing to model the kind of grace that human beings often struggle to achieve. The center had become a living laboratory for studying the bonds between damaged heroes. In addition to Thor and Rex, who had made remarkable progress in the 5 years since his rescue, the facility housed over 60 retired military working dogs, police canines, search and rescue animals, and service dogs whose working careers had ended in injury or trauma. Each animal's story was unique, but the patterns of abuse, abandonment, and eventual healing created a tapestry of resilience that inspired visitors from around the world. The Human Veteran Program had proven equally transformative. Combat veterans dealing with PTSD found purpose in caring for animals who understood their struggles without judgment. Former police officers channeled their protective instincts into rehabilitation work. Firefighters like Marcus discovered that healing others could begin their own recovery process. Emma Chen, now 13 and volunteering at the center every weekend, had become Thor's unofficial biographer. Her school project on Heroes Who Help Heroes had evolved into a comprehensive oral history of the center's animals and their human partners. She moved through the facility with the confidence of someone who had grown up understanding that heroes came in many forms. "Mr. William," she called as she approached with her ever-present notebook, "Thor's got another visitor today. Mrs. Patterson wants to bring her twins to meet him. They're the ones he saved from the apartment fire when they were little kids." The Patterson twins, now 17 and preparing for college, represented the ongoing ripple effects of Thor's heroism. Their rescue had set off a chain of gratitude that continued to generate support for the center. They visited annually on the anniversary of the fire, each year bringing new perspective on how a single act of courage could reshape multiple lives across decades. William watched as Bradley began his orientation with Janet Rodriguez, the center's head trainer, and herself a veteran who had found healing through animal work. The program Bradley would enter was rigorous, 6 months of intensive training in animal behavior, trauma response, and rehabilitation techniques, followed by gradual integration into the care teams under close supervision. "He'll start with the less traumatized animals," Janet explained to William as they observed Bradley's careful interaction with a retired bomb detection dog named Charlie. "Build trust gradually, learn to read canine stress signals, understand how his own energy affects the animals. If he proves himself worthy of the responsibility, he might eventually work with the severe cases." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had once run an illegal fighting ring was now learning to become a professional animal rehabilitator. But the center's philosophy was built on the belief that everyone deserved a chance at redemption, that understanding trauma could transform perpetrators into healers. Thor's own daily routine had evolved into a masterclass in therapeutic intervention. Each morning he made rounds with William, assessing the emotional state of newer arrivals and determining which animals might benefit from his presence. His approach was always careful and respectful, a sniff to gauge stress levels, a gentle nuzzle for animals ready for contact, or simply lying quietly nearby for those too traumatized for direct interaction. Rex had become Thor's most devoted student, learning to mirror the older dog's calm confidence with newer arrivals. The transformation from broken fighting victim to therapy animal had taken 3 years, but Rex now served as living proof that even the most damaged heroes could find purpose again. His missing eye had become a badge of honor rather than shame, evidence that survival itself was a form of victory. The afternoon brought Senator Williams for her quarterly site visit, accompanied by congressional staff members who were documenting the program's success for upcoming budget hearings. The Hero Animal Protection Act had passed 3 years earlier, providing federal funding that had made the center's expansion possible. But ongoing political support required constant demonstration of results. "Dr. Thompson," Senator Williams said as they toured the new rehabilitation wing, "I need specific numbers for the Appropriations Committee. How many animals have you successfully placed in permanent homes?" 147 over the past 5 years, William replied, consulting his ever-present clipboard. "But more importantly, our recidivism rate is less than 3%. Animals that complete our program don't end up back in abusive situations or fighting rings." The statistics told only part of the story. Each successful placement represented a family that had gained a hero, a community that had learned about the value of service animals, a network of support that extended far beyond the center's boundaries. Thor's influence could be measured not just in animals saved, but in minds changed about what society owed its veterans. As evening approached, William found himself in his favorite spot, the memorial garden where brass plaques honored animals who hadn't survived their trauma but whose stories had contributed to the center's mission. Thor settled beside him with the comfortable ease of a companion who had shared countless quiet moments over the years. "You know what I think about most?" William said, scratching behind Thor's ears. "That night you showed up in the snow. I thought I was saving you. Turns out, you were saving me. Giving me purpose again, helping me understand that service doesn't end when you get old or tired or broken." Thor's tail wagged gently, his response to the familiar cadence of William's evening reflections. In the distance, Marcus Bradley was helping Janet secure the evening feeding routine, his movements careful and deliberate as he learned to read the subtle signals that indicated stress or contentment in his charges. The center's success had sparked similar programs across the country, creating a network of facilities dedicated to honoring the service of animal veterans. But for William, the measure of success wasn't in the expansion or the accolades. It was in moments like these when two old veterans could sit together in comfortable silence, knowing they had found their way home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new animals in need of healing, new humans seeking redemption through service. But tonight, as stars appeared over the Michigan countryside, Thor and William rested in the knowledge that they had built something lasting, a place where heroes helped heroes, where broken could become whole again, and where the bonds forged through service could heal even the deepest wounds. The circle was complete, but the work would continue. In a world that often forgets its heroes once the cameras stop rolling, Thor's story reminds us that true service never really ends, it just transforms. Like so many of us who've reached our golden years, Thor discovered that being retired doesn't mean being worthless. At 12 years old, with a graying muzzle and careful steps, he found his greatest purpose not in his prime, but in his wisdom years, teaching younger heroes that survival is just the beginning of the story. William Thompson, at 74, could have spent his remaining years in quiet solitude, mourning his late wife and accepting society's subtle message that his usefulness had expired. Instead, he learned what many of us discover in our 60s and 70s, that our accumulated experience, our understanding of loss and resilience, our patience earned through decades of living, makes us uniquely qualified to heal the world's broken places. Thor and William's partnership proves that our finest chapters might still be unwritten. Every senior who volunteers, mentors, or simply refuses to fade quietly into society's background is writing their own version of this story, transforming personal pain into purpose, using hard-won wisdom to lift others, and demonstrating that heroes don't retire, they just find new ways to serve. Questions for you. What moment in your life transformed your greatest pain into your deepest purpose? How has your experience with loss or hardship equipped you to help others in ways you never could when you were younger? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.